Every Sunday morning at exactly 9 a.m., the most dangerous man in Harlem would do something that could get him killed. His own bodyguards thought he had lost his mind. His wife begged him to stop. Even the Italian Mafia, which respected him, couldn't understand why he kept doing it. For 40 years, he never missed a single Sunday. Not once. And his daughter kept this secret until 2008, when she finally revealed what her father was really doing. What she said changed everything people thought they knew about Bumpy Johnson. But to understand why this Sunday ritual mattered so much, you need to know about a promise made by a 12-year-old boy to his dying grandmother in 1918. A promise that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Let me take you back to where this all started. Charleston, South Carolina, 1906. A boy was born named Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. Nobody called him Bumpy yet. That nickname came later from a bump on the back of his head from a childhood injury. His family had nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean they were so poor that some days they didn't eat. His mother worked cleaning white people's houses for pennies. His father left when Bumpy was just a baby. The only person who really raised him was his grandmother. No, this grandmother was different from most people in Charleston at that time. She could read and write, which was rare for a black woman in the South back then. She taught young Bumpy his letters and numbers by candlelight every night. She took him to church every Sunday without fail. Rain, shine, sickness, it didn't matter. Sunday was the Lord's day, and you spent it helping people and being grateful. That's what she taught him. She worked as hard as anyone, but she always found time to help neighbors who had even less than they did. When someone on their street couldn't afford food, she'd share what little they had. When someone got sick, she'd sit with them through the night. Young Bumpy watched all of this. He saw how his grandmother lived. He saw how she treated people, and he loved her more than anything in the world. She was the only stability in his chaotic childhood. The only person who made him feel like he mattered. The only person who believed he could be something more than just another poor black kid in the South with no future. In 1918, when Bumpy was 12 years old, his grandmother got very sick. At first, it seemed like a normal cold, but it got worse and worse. She developed a fever that wouldn't break. She couldn't get out of bed. They didn't have money for a real doctor. The only medical help available to poor black families was a local woman who knew some remedies, but nothing worked. Bumpy watched his grandmother get weaker every single day. He felt completely helpless. Here was this woman who had given him everything, and he couldn't do anything to save her. One Sunday morning, his grandmother called him to her bedside. She could barely speak. Her breathing was shallow and labored. Bumpy knew this might be the last time he ever talked to her. She reached out and grabbed his hand with what little strength she had left. Her hand was burning hot from the fever. She looked him in the eyes and made him promise something. She said, "Ellsworth, life is going to be hard for you, harder than it should be. You're going to see things and do things that will change you, but I need you to promise me something right now. Promise me that no matter what you become, no matter where you go, no matter what the world turns you into, you will never forget where you came from. Promise me you'll help the people nobody else helps, the ones the world forgets about, the ones with nothing, every Sunday, like the Lord intended. Can you promise me that?" Bumpy was crying. He nodded and said yes, he promised. His grandmother made him say it out loud 3 times. She made him swear on the Bible she kept by her bed. Then she closed her eyes and said, "Good. Don't ever break this promise. Even if you break every other promise you make in your life, keep this one. This is the one that matters." She died 2 days later. Bumpy was 12 years old, and the person he loved most in the world was gone. Something broke inside him that day. The funeral was small, just a few neighbors and family. They buried her in an unmarked grave because they couldn't afford a headstone. After the funeral, Bumpy's mother told him they were leaving Charleston. There was nothing left for them there. They were moving north to Harlem, New York, where his mother had a cousin who said he could get her work. In 1919, Bumpy Johnson arrived in Harlem. He was 13 years old, angry at the world, and had just lost the only person who kept him on a good path. Harlem in 1919 was exploding. The Great Migration was bringing thousands of black people from the South every single month. Jobs were available, culture was thriving, jazz clubs were opening. But there was also poverty, overcrowding, and crime. Lots of crime. Young Bumpy fell in with the wrong crowd almost immediately. Street gangs were everywhere, and they were always looking for tough kids who weren't afraid of anything. Bumpy wasn't afraid of anything anymore. What did he have to lose? By age 15, Bumpy had his first arrest for armed robbery. The police beat him badly, but he never gave up the names of the other boys involved. This earned him respect on the streets. Word got around that this young kid from South Carolina was tough, smart, and loyal. He got noticed by the real criminals, the ones making serious money. At 16, Bumpy started working as a runner for the numbers racket. The numbers game was like an illegal lottery that everyone in Harlem played. Poor people would bet pennies, hoping to win dollars. It was the only gambling they could afford, and it made the people who ran it very, very rich. Bumpy was good at this work. Really good. He was smart with numbers, he was good with people, and he was absolutely fearless when it came to collecting debts or handling problems. By his early 20s, he was working directly for Stephanie Street Claire, who people called Madam Queen. She was the most powerful black woman in the Harlem underworld. She saw something special in Bumpy and made him her main enforcer. This meant when someone didn't pay, when someone stole, when someone caused problems, Bumpy handled it, and handle it he did. He developed a reputation for extreme violence. He didn't just hurt people, he made examples of them. If you crossed Madam Queen, Bumpy Johnson would find you, and what happened next would be talked about in whispers for months. During this time, Bumpy was becoming everything his grandmother feared. He was stealing, beating people, destroying lives. He carried weapons. He barely slept. He trusted no one. The streets were turning him into something dark. But here's where the story gets interesting. In 1928, when Bumpy was 22 years old, something changed. It was a Sunday morning. He woke up in a small apartment in Harlem after a particularly violent week, where he'd put 2 men in the hospital over gambling debts. He looked at himself in a cracked mirror, and for just a moment, he remembered his grandmother's face. He remembered that promise. 10 years had passed since she died, and he hadn't thought about that promise in years. Something inside him shifted. He got dressed, not in his usual flashy street clothes, but in a simple dark suit. He walked out of his apartment and started walking through Harlem. Not the parts he controlled, not where he did business. He walked to the poorest blocks where families were being evicted, where kids were going hungry, and where elderly people sat alone with no help. He stopped at a building where he'd heard a single mother with 3 kids was about to be thrown out for not paying rent. He knocked on her door. When she answered, terrified, because she recognized him from the streets, he handed her an envelope with cash, enough to cover her rent for 3 months. He didn't say his name. He just said, "This is from someone who made a promise." Then, he walked away. He did this at 4 more apartments that day. By the time he was done, he'd given away more money than most people in Harlem made in a year, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a decade. He felt like maybe a small part of his grandmother's boy was still alive inside him. From that Sunday forward, Bumpy Johnson never missed his ritual, not once in 40 years. Every single Sunday at 9 a.m., he would wake up and do the same thing. Now you have to understand how dangerous this was. By the 1,930 seconds, Bumpy Johnson wasn't just some enforcer anymore. He was running significant parts of Harlem's criminal operations. The numbers, protection rackets, gambling, and later even narcotics. He had enemies everywhere. The Italian Mafia wanted control of Harlem and saw Bumpy as an obstacle. Dutch Schultz, a violent psychopath who worked for the mob, was actively trying to take over the numbers game and had put a price on Bumpy's head. At one point, the bounty was $50,000, which in 1,930 930 seconds money was an enormous fortune. People were constantly trying to kill him. Bumpy had bodyguards around him at all times. He traveled in cars with armed men. He never went anywhere alone. Except Sundays. Every Sunday, he would tell his bodyguards to stay behind. He'd get in a car by himself and drive off for 4 hours. His associates thought he was meeting with someone secretly. Maybe informants. Maybe corrupt cops. Maybe he had a secret family nobody knew about. They came up with all kinds of theories. But Bumpy never told anyone the truth. He'd just smile and say he had business to handle. His wife, May, found out eventually. She followed him one Sunday in 1936, about a year after they got married. She watched him go from building to building in the poorest neighborhoods, handing out envelopes of cash. When he got home, she confronted him. She was furious. Not because he was giving away money, but because he was doing it alone and unprotected. She said, "You're going to get yourself killed over this." Bumpy looked at her and said, "I made a promise to my grandmother. If I break this promise, I'm already dead inside. What's the point of being alive?" Mamie understood then. She never tried to stop him again, but she worried every single Sunday for the next 32 years. And she had good reason to worry. In 1938, Bumpy was shot while walking back to his car after making his Sunday deliveries. 2 men jumped him in an alley. They shot him twice, once in the leg and once in the shoulder. Somehow, Bumpy managed to fight them off and get away. He showed up at a doctor he trusted, bleeding badly. The doctor patched him up and told him he was lucky to be alive. The next Sunday, still recovering, Bumpy got up at 9 a.m. and did his ritual anyway. He could barely walk, but he refused to miss it. His wife tried to physically stop him, but he pushed past her. He said that promise was the only thing keeping him human. Over the years, Bumpy Johnson became more and more powerful. By the 1,940 seconds, he was one of the most feared men in New York. He worked with the Italian Mafia when it suited him. He worked against them when necessary. He went to prison multiple times, but always came out and reclaimed his territory. He was brilliant at the criminal game. Strategic, ruthless, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. People called him the Professor because of how smart he was. But every Sunday, no matter what, he became someone different. He developed strict rules for his Sunday ritual. First rule, nobody could know it was him giving the money. He'd never use his real name. Sometimes, he'd send trusted associates with sealed envelopes and instructions to give them to specific families. If anyone tried to thank him publicly or tell people who helped them, he'd cut them off. He didn't want recognition. He didn't want people to think this made him a good person. He just wanted to keep his promise. Second rule, no one he'd hurt in his criminal life could benefit from his Sunday charity. He kept a mental list of every family that had been damaged by his operations. If he'd sold drugs to someone's son, if he'd hurt someone's father, if his business had destroyed a family, they were excluded. He told one of his lieutenants, "I don't get to apologize with money. I separate my sins from my salvation." The third rule, and this was the most important one, he never missed a Sunday. In 1952, Bumpy was hospitalized after another attempt on his life. He was shot multiple times, and the doctors said he needed to stay in bed for at least 2 weeks. On Sunday, Bumpy checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice, did his deliveries while barely able to stand, then went back to the hospital. The nurses thought he was insane. In 1963, Bumpy was in hiding because the FBI and NYPD had warrants out for his arrest. He couldn't show his face anywhere without risking capture. But on Sunday, he still sent his most trusted man with envelopes of cash and a list of addresses. He told him, "If you steal even $1, I'll know, and you know what happens then?" Fourth rule, he kept detailed records. After Bumpy died, his daughter Ruthie was going through his belongings and found dozens of notebooks hidden in a secret compartment in his office. These notebooks contained lists of every family he'd helped, the amounts he'd given, And the dates. The entries went back to 1928. 40 years of Sundays. 40 years of keeping track. She read through them and realized her father had given away roughly $2 million over his lifetime. In today's money, that would be close to $20 million. Money that came from criminal enterprises, yes, but money that went to people who desperately needed it. The notebooks revealed something else, too. They showed Bumpy's mindset. Next to many entries, he'd written little notes. Things like, rent paid for 3 months, kids can eat now, or medical bills covered, grandmother can get surgery, or funeral costs paid. She can be buried with dignity. These weren't just transactions to him. He knew these were real people with real problems. And he remembered every single one. Some of the families he helped never knew who helped them. They'd just find an envelope of cash slipped under their door with a note saying, "From a friend." Others knew it was connected to Bumpy somehow, but didn't dare ask questions. You didn't ask Bumpy Johnson questions. But years later, after he died, some of these people came forward with their stories. An elderly woman in her 80s was interviewed in 1995. She said that in 1955, her husband died suddenly, and she had 4 children to feed with no income. She was going to lose their apartment and didn't know what to do. One Sunday morning, someone knocked on her door. A well-dressed man she didn't recognize handed her an envelope with $500 and said, "This is for you and your children. You'll get the same amount every month for a year." She tried to ask who sent it, but the man just tipped his hat and left. Every month for a year, like clockwork, an envelope with $500 appeared under her door. It was always on a Sunday. It was always the same amount. After that year, the envelope stopped, but by then she'd gotten a job and could support her family. She said, "I found out years later it was Bumpy Johnson. People said he was evil. Maybe he was, but he saved my children's lives." Another man told a story about his mother in an interview from 2003. He said in 1961, his mother needed an emergency surgery, but they had no money and no insurance. The hospital wanted cash up front, or they wouldn't do the operation. His mother was going to die without it. His father was desperate and went around Harlem asking everyone he knew for help. Nobody had that kind of money. Then one Sunday, his father came home with tears in his eyes and $10,000 in cash. He said a man approached him on the street, someone he'd never seen before, and asked what was wrong. His father explained about the surgery. The man disappeared for an hour, then came back with the money. All he said was, "Pay it forward someday." The mother got her surgery and lived another 30 years. The son said, "We never knew for sure, but everyone in the neighborhood said it had to be Bumpy. That's what he did on Sundays." There's another story that really shows who Bumpy was on those Sundays. In 1959, there was a young single mother named Dorothy who lived in one of the worst buildings in Harlem. The building had no heat in winter, rats everywhere, and the landlord refused to fix anything. Dorothy had a baby daughter, and the child got sick from the cold and the terrible conditions. The baby almost died. Dorothy was furious and desperate. She'd heard stories about Bumpy Johnson helping people, so she did something incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, depending on how you look at it. She went looking for him. She asked around until someone told her where he'd be. She waited outside a bar where he was meeting with associates. When Bumpy came out, she walked right up to him. His bodyguards immediately stepped forward, but Bumpy held up his hand. He looked at this young woman and asked what she wanted. Dorothy told him about her building, about her sick baby, about the landlord who wouldn't help. She said, "Everyone says you run Harlem. If you really run it, why are you letting babies freeze in buildings with no heat?" Bumpy stared at her for a long moment. His associates were tense, waiting to see what he'd do. Nobody talked to Bumpy Johnson like that. But instead of getting angry, Bumpy asked for her address. She gave it to him. He told her to go home. 3 days later, that Wednesday, contractors showed up at Dorothy's building. They fixed the heat. They repaired the plumbing. They dealt with the rats. They repainted the hallways. The landlord suddenly appeared and apologized to all the tenants. The work took 2 weeks, and when it was done, that building was one of the nicest in the neighborhood. Dorothy never received a bill. Years later, she found out that Bumpy had paid for all the repairs himself, and he'd also had a very serious conversation with the landlord about what would happen if the building ever fell into disrepair again. That landlord kept that building in perfect condition for the next 20 years. But here's the thing you have to understand. Bumpy Johnson was still a criminal. He was still destroying lives Monday through Saturday. While he was helping families on Sunday, he was selling heroin the rest of the week. Heroin that destroyed those same communities. He was running protection rackets that forced business owners to pay him or face violence. He was involved in murders. He ordered people beaten and sometimes killed. He corrupted police officers and judges. He made Harlem a more dangerous place in many ways. This Sunday ritual didn't erase any of that. It didn't make him a good person. It didn't balance out the harm he caused. Some of the families he helped on Sunday were probably related to people his drug operations hurt. A mother he gave rent money to might have had a son who became addicted to the heroin Bumpy's organization sold. An elderly man whose medical bills Bumpy paid might have had a grandson who got shot in a gang war over Bumpy's territory. The contradiction was enormous and painful. Bumpy had to have known this. He wasn't stupid. He understood that his Sunday charity couldn't fix the damage he did the rest of the week. So why did he keep doing it? His daughter Ruthie talked about this in her 2008 interview. The reporter asked her directly, "Did your father think his Sunday charity made up for his crimes?" Ruthie shook her head and said, "No. He knew it didn't. He told me once, when I was a teenager and starting to understand what he really did for a living, he said that the Sunday promise wasn't about balancing scales. It wasn't about making himself feel better or earning points with God. It was about holding on to one piece of his humanity, one piece of the boy that his grandmother raised. He said if he let go of that promise, there'd be nothing left of Ellsworth. There'd only be Bumpy, and Ellsworth needed to survive, even if it was just for 4 hours every Sunday." That's a heavy thing to think about. Here was a man who knew he was doing terrible things. He wasn't in denial. He wasn't lying to himself. But he was desperate to keep one part of himself separate from all of that. One part that was still connected to love and goodness, and the person who believed in him before the world got to him. Whether that makes sense or whether that's just a criminal trying to feel better about himself, I can't say. But it explains why he never stopped. Why did he risk his life every single Sunday for 40 years? By the 1,960 Bumpy Johnson was in his 50s, and his world was changing. The civil rights movement was happening all around him. Young black activists were fighting for equality and justice through protests and legislation. Malcolm X was rising to prominence and actually knew Bumpy personally. They'd met several times and had long conversations. Malcolm X had complicated feelings about Bumpy. He understood that Bumpy had power in the community and helped people, but he also knew that Bumpy's criminal empire was part of what was holding black people back. There's a famous exchange between them where Malcolm X said something like, "Brother, you could do so much good if you stopped harming." And Bumpy reportedly replied, "I'm too far gone for that. But maybe the kids coming up don't have to be." The FBI was also closing in. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI was obsessed with black organized crime and civil rights leaders, often treating them as the same threat. Bumpy was under constant surveillance. His phone was tapped. His associates were being arrested. The pressure was enormous. Several times, federal agents tried to flip people close to Bumpy, offering deals if they'd testify against him. Some took the deals. Some stayed loyal. Bumpy spent more time looking over his shoulder than ever before. But still, every Sunday, he kept his promise. In 1965, he was arrested on federal charges and held without bail. He was in jail for 3 months before his lawyer got him out on a technicality. The first thing he did when he was released was make his Sunday rounds. He'd missed 13 Sundays while locked up. He couldn't make up for that lost time, and it bothered him deeply. His wife said he was depressed for weeks, feeling like he'd broken his promise, even though being in jail wasn't his choice. In early 1968, Bumpy's health started declining. He was 62 years old, and decades of stress, violence, and hard living were catching up with him. He had heart problems. His doctor told him he needed to slow down, reduce stress, maybe even retire. Bumpy laughed at that. He said retirement wasn't an option in his line of work. You either died or you went to prison. Those were the only ways out. His wife begged him to at least cut back. Stop going out so much. Let younger guys handle more of the operations. And definitely stop the Sunday drives alone. She was terrified every Sunday that he wouldn't come home. July 7th, 1968. It was a Sunday. Bumpy woke up at 6 a.m. like always. But something was different that morning. He told his wife he didn't feel well. He had chest pains. His left arm felt numb. These are classic signs of a heart attack, but Bumpy brushed it off. He got dressed in his simple Sunday suit. His wife was crying, begging him not to go. She said, "Please, just this once, stay home. Something's wrong. I can feel it." Bumpy kissed her forehead and said, "I made a promise, baby. I can't break it." Those were the last words he said to her before leaving the house. Bumpy made his Sunday deliveries that morning. According to his notebook, which was found later, he helped 5 families that day. The entries were written in shakier handwriting than usual. The last entry said, "Mrs. Washington, $400, medical, paid." He finished around 1 p.m. and drove home. When he walked in the door, his wife said he looked gray and was sweating. He sat down at the kitchen table to eat lunch. He took a few bites. Then he grabbed his chest. He tried to say something, but couldn't get the words out. He collapsed right there at the table. His wife screamed and called for an ambulance, but it was too late. Bumpy Johnson died in his home, surrounded by his family, just hours after keeping his promise one last time. The funeral was massive. Thousands of people showed up. It was held at a church in Harlem, and the line of people waiting to pay respects stretched for blocks. The Italian Mafia sent representatives. Other criminals came from as far as Chicago and Philadelphia. But most of the people there were regular folks from Harlem. Poor families, working people, elderly folks, and single mothers with their children. Many of them are crying. Many of them with stories about envelopes of cash that appeared when they had nothing. About strangers who helped them when no one else would. About Sundays when miracles happened. One old woman was interviewed at the funeral. She was probably in her 70s, wearing a simple black dress and hat. The reporter asked why she came. She said, "Bumpy Johnson was a complicated man. He did bad things, I'm not going to lie about that, but he also saved my family. Back in 1956, my husband died, and I had 6 kids to feed. I was going to lose everything. Then, one Sunday, money showed up. Every month for 2 years, money showed up. My kids ate because of that. They went to school because of that. 2 of them went to college. They have good lives now. Bumpy Johnson made that possible. So yeah, he was a criminal, but he was also an angel to us. Sometimes people are both things at once." After the funeral, Bumpy's daughter Ruthie and his wife Mamie went through his belongings. That's when they found the notebooks. Dozens of them, hidden carefully. Ruthie sat down and read every single one. She saw 40 years of Sunday entries. Thousands of families were helped, millions of dollars given away. And all those little notes her father wrote next to the entries, showing he actually cared about these people. She cried, reading them. She'd known about the Sunday drives, but she didn't know the full extent. She didn't know how much of himself her father had given to keep that promise. Ruthie kept those notebooks private for 40 years. She didn't want people to think she was trying to excuse her father's crimes or make him look better than he was. She said in her interview that she struggled her whole life with who her father was. She loved him because he was her father, Ather, and he loved her and treated her well. But she also knew he hurt people. He destroyed lives. He made Harlem more dangerous. She couldn't reconcile those two versions of him, the loving father and the violent criminal, the man who gave away millions to help the poor, and the man who sold drugs that destroyed families. In 2008, when she was in her 70s, Ruthie finally decided to tell the story. She was interviewed for a documentary about Harlem in the mid-20th century. The interviewer asked about her father's legacy. That's when Ruthie pulled out one of the notebooks and showed it on camera. She explained the Sunday ritual. She explained the promise to the grandmother. She explained everything. The interviewer was shocked. This part of Bumpy Johnson's life was completely unknown. There'd been rumors over the years, but no proof. Now here was his daughter, with written evidence spanning 4 decades. The interviewer asked Ruthie, "Why are you telling this story now?" Ruthie said, "Because I'm old and I'm tired of carrying it alone, and because I think people need to understand that human beings are complicated. We want everyone to be all good or all bad. We want clear heroes and clear villains, but real people aren't like that. My father was a criminal who caused real harm, that's true. But he was also a man who kept a promise to his dying grandmother for 40 years, giving away millions of dollars to people who had nothing, risking his life every single week, never missing once, never asking for credit, never using it to make himself look good. Both of those things are true. What you make of that is up to you." The documentary aired, and people had strong reactions. Some said it didn't matter what good Bumpy did, he was still a criminal, and criminal actions define a person. Others said the Sunday ritual showed that even in the darkest people, there can be light. Some people who'd been helped by Bumpy came forward with their own stories, adding to what Ruthie revealed. Historians started investigating and confirmed that yes, Bumpy Johnson had a reputation in Harlem for secret charity. Old police records mentioned it. FBI surveillance files mentioned agents being confused about where Bumpy went every Sunday. One FBI report from 1966 said, "Subject continues weekly Sunday routine of unknown purpose, travels alone to various locations in Harlem, stays briefly, then moves to the next location. Surveillance teams are unable to determine the purpose of these trips. Subject appears to make no criminal contacts during these excursions. Behavior remains unexplained. The FBI was watching him for years and never figured out what he was doing. They thought maybe he was collecting money or meeting informants. They never considered that he might be giving money away." Today, Bumpy Johnson's legacy is complicated, just like his daughter said. In Harlem, older people remember him in different ways. Some remember him as a protector, who kept the worst criminals out, and who helped the community when nobody else would. Others remember him as part of the problem, as someone whose drug trade destroyed families and whose violence made the neighborhood dangerous. Both memories are valid. Both are true. There's a community center in Harlem that was built on a lot that Bumpy used to own. When the city took the land through eminent domain after he died, they found a safety deposit box key in his papers. The key led to a box that contained $50,000 in cash and a note that said, "For the children of Harlem, for a place where they can be safe and learn. Keep this quiet." The money was used to help fund the community center. To this day, very few people know that Bumpy Johnson's money helped build it. His family kept it quiet, like he would have wanted. What do we make of all this? Can a person who does terrible things also do genuinely good things? Can those good things matter even if they don't erase the bad? Is keeping a promise to your grandmother for 40 years meaningful if you're breaking every other moral rule the rest of the time? These aren't easy questions, and there aren't clear answers. Bumpy Johnson's story doesn't give us a neat moral lesson. It gives us something messier and more real. It shows us that people contain contradictions, that someone can be violent and generous, ruthless and loving, destructive and protective. Maybe the Sunday ritual mattered because it kept Bumpy connected to his humanity. Maybe it didn't matter at all because the harm he caused was so much greater than the good. Maybe it matters to the specific families he helped and doesn't matter to anyone else. Maybe keeping that promise was Bumpy's way of holding on to hope that he wasn't completely lost. Or maybe it was just a criminal trying to ease his guilt. I can't tell you which interpretation is right because I honestly don't know. What I do know is that for 40 years, every single Sunday, Bumpy Johnson kept a promise to his grandmother. Through violence, through imprisonment, through attempts on his life, through becoming one of the most feared criminals in New York, he never broke that one promise. And on his very last day on Earth, even though he was having a heart attack, he still went out and helped people before he died. His wife said something in an interview years after his death. She said, "People always want to know if Bumpy was good or bad. I tell them he was human. Humans aren't one thing. We're capable of great love and terrible cruelty, sometimes in the same person, sometimes on the same day. Bumpy loved me. He loved his daughter. He loved his grandmother so much that he kept her alive in his heart by honoring her wishes every week for 40 years. But he also hurt people. He made choices that caused suffering. Both things existed in the same man. That's who he was." In the end, maybe that's the real story. Not that Bumpy Johnson was secretly good or that his charity redeemed him, but that even in a life full of darkness, he fought to keep one small light burning. A light that was connected to love, to his grandmother, to the boy from South Carolina who promised he'd never forget where he came from. He kept that light alive for 40 years. Whether that matters or not is something each person has to decide for themselves.